I have with me today on the show one of my best friends in the world, Jordan Montgomery.
I get a text message from my boss. He's like, "Yeah, I need to speak with you right away." I said, "Not today. I got things going on." First words out of his mouth, he said, "You haven't been malicious or intentional, but you've been careless and casual. And when you're casual, you create casualties. Today, you are the casualty." He shared with me this question that ultimately I think probably changed my life. He said, "You need to start asking this question. It's one of life's most important questions. The question's hard to ask. The answer is even harder to find. But the question is..."
I have with me today on the show one of my best friends in the world, Jordan Montgomery, husband to Ashley and father to Audrey, Claire, Olivia, and Mac. Probably his most important leadership role as husband and father. But like I said, one of my best friends, and just so inspired by you, Jordan. I love how you lead your family and how you lead in the community. You're one of the most gifted human beings I've ever met. And you know, we go way back. We competed against one another in high school. But I think about, you know, the season of life where we really started establishing meaningful connection. We're going to get into that here in a second. But really over the last handful of years, we've become great friends, and we've had the opportunity to do some incredible things together. I'm thinking of some of the amazing events that we've been at together, some of the opportunities that we've had to serve different companies and clients together. And I just want you to know this, man. I'm so inspired by you. I'm so thankful for you. You are, when I think of you, I think Chief Encouragement Officer. You're like the lid lifter, man. You help people realize their full potential. And I know this much, that I wouldn't be walking in some of the things I'm walking in today without you. So welcome to the show, man. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Well, man, right back at you, bro. You've been such a blessing to me and to our family. And the doors you've opened, the words of encouragement, the crazy late night conversations, road trips, events, like I wouldn't trade it for anything, man. And we were joking offline before this conversation started that this feels like a break in the day. So, you have a good friend when a purposeful, meaningful conversation can still feel like a break. And it's always just a joy to hang with you, man. So thanks for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, we're glad you're here, man. And this is actually episode 1 of launching a new show. We're calling this the Backstage. And you know this, we talk about this often. Man, you know, we can have an awesome front stage. We can experience success in those things. But if our backstage isn't in order, if we're not doing what we need to do in our backstage, it'll eventually catch up to us. And we think about how important it is to stay grounded, and just how important, you know, these conversations are to how you and I are actually trying to walk that out. It's not easy. We're not perfect. We don't have our backstage all together. But I do think it's interesting as I start this show, I think of really close friends that are doing some amazing things, and just people that I want to connect with and have conversations with. Oftentimes, you know, we see the highlight reel. We see, we see these snippets, but we don't see the sacrifice, the blood, sweat, tears, the late nights, the working on the craft, the time spent with family. You know, what are some of the habits that are happening behind the scenes that actually lead to the success? And really, as we begin this show, we're just excited to lean in and inspire some people. And I think about our friendship, Jordan, and this is kind of where I want to start today. But you and I, obviously, we grew up competing against one another, but really, we started to get close when you were walking through a difficult season. And you describe it like this. You say, "I went from the penthouse to the outhouse." Can you tell us a little bit about that story?
Yeah, man. And one of the blessings that came out of that was really the strengthening of our friendship. So it's interesting how you even shared that, because I think I would have gone further back, but you're right that we got close in a season of real brokenness in my life. And so, yeah, circa 2015, man, it's April 1st, 2015. I get a text message from my boss. He's like, "Yeah, I need to speak with you right away." I said, "Not today. I got things going on." He said, "This is the kind of meeting where you clear your calendar." I thought, man, this is serious. Somebody on my team must have made a big mistake. I was that naive. And so I went to that meeting a couple hours later. I'll never forget the first words out of his mouth. He said, "You haven't been malicious or intentional, but you've been careless and casual. And when you're casual, you create casualties. Today, you are the casualty, and it will be your last day with our firm." And so the reality is, Mike, like I just wasn't dotting I's and crossing T's. There was a person on my team that took a test on my behalf. And really, like, I think my leader at the time, the boss who let me go, really just wasn't very trusting of my character. You know, I think there was a pastor that we're both friends with that said people can be impressed with your talent, but they fall in love with your character. And I don't think he loved my character. I was underdeveloped, overexposed. I was out front. I had influence that my character wasn't matching. And eventually it kind of caught up to me. I don't think God caused it, but I think he allowed it. And so, yeah, man, I went from the Penthouse to an Outhouse. I got let go of a high-level leadership position inside of a Fortune 100 company. Man, it was incredibly public. It wasn't just that I got let go from the position. I lost all my clients in the process. I was also involved in some real estate deals. The deals went sideways because I didn't have them set up properly. So I lost all my money. Man, I lost a lot of the influence that I had. I lost my position, the role that I had inside that firm. But, man, by God's grace, a couple people stepped into my life, a guy by the name of Tim Bohannon, who you've heard me talk about. And he just said this. He said, hey, you can come work for me, same firm, same opportunity. It wasn't like some major infraction where I couldn't be in the industry. But it was just kind of a second chance. And so he took me in and he said, no speaking, no teaching, no coaching. You're just going to work on yourself for 2 years. You're going to crack the word. You're going to develop yourself. You're going to work on your awareness, your emotional intelligence, your decision making. And so, man, that's what I did for 2 years in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I didn't really know anybody there. It was a really dark, hard season of my life. It's where you and I had a lot of conversations, Mike, about all kinds of things. And you were such an encouragement to me in that season. But in that season, I met my now wife, and man, God just put a lot of things back together in a beautiful way. So I'm thankful for it. I can say that now looking back, like I'm really thankful for the brokenness and the pain. There's that old adage that God's preparation is so often packaged as pain. And that was true in my life, man, because I was getting ready to become a dad and a husband. And Lord knows I needed to work some things out of my character before I was ready to stop into those leadership roles that you talked about earlier, you know, being dad and being a husband. So yeah, man, that's the short, probably 4-minute version of the story that I've been through that you know so well. But for our audience, that's a little bit about my background.
No, thanks for sharing that. And I think oftentimes, you know, even if we had a part to play, seasons like this can create disappointment, right? And I would imagine that you were experiencing a ton of disappointment. It's one thing to be on this side of it, looking back at all that God has done through it. But I want you to go back to just that season and kind of put yourself back in your shoes, so to speak. And I want you to think about what the first, 30 days looked like as you processed what you were walking through. And if I recall, Tim actually approached you about 30 days in and asked you a life-changing question. Do you remember that question and just kind of that moment where maybe you were kind of caught up in thinking about how the situation was unfair, or maybe it shouldn't have been that extreme? And, when we're walking through disappointment, those are some of the thoughts that we can face. But how did that shift where you really began to take ownership over what had taken place?
Yeah, I think I was just a bruised and battered 27-year-old young man. And so I complained a lot, so when that all went down, my posture wasn't like, oh man, I have work to do. My posture was, that was really unfair. And I got wronged, and I'm paying this really severe penalty for a small infraction. Like, that was everything that was coming out of me in terms of my response, my communication, my attitude. So Tim, like any good leader, sort of listened to me for about 30 days. So I felt heard and seen and valued. But then after about 30 days of listening, he stopped listening. And he shared with me this question that ultimately I think probably changed my life. He said, you need to start asking this question. It's one of life's most important questions. The question's hard to ask. The answer is even harder to find. But the question is, what part of the problem is me? And his point was, whether you're 5% of the problem or 95% of the problem, you are, in fact, part of the problem. That's the question that will set you free. And when you start to answer it, your life will fall into place. And sure enough, man, it did. That's the question that allowed me to get back to God's word and back to close relationships, friendships. I started seeking counsel. It just really changed. Because I did have things that I needed to work through. I wasn't in the word. I wasn't in community. I didn't have an active prayer life. I wasn't walking with Jesus. I had all kinds of things that I needed to change. And it was a powerful moment, in my life and in my leadership journey.
Yeah, we often talk about how our beliefs determine our behaviors, and oftentimes it's our identity that informs our beliefs. And I've just heard you talk about in this particular season just how your identity wasn't, maybe where it is today. And obviously we're all going on a journey, and even our listeners, our audience, they're all at different spaces and places. But you also say that, man, if we live for the praise of men, then we'll die by their criticism. And so can you just kind of speak to where your identity was at in this particular season and how that played into some of the decisions that you were making?
Yeah, I think for me, man, I was just totally wrapped up in success and accomplishment, achievement, my bank account, status, reputation. And it sounds ugly even to say it now. Like, I just don't love that was part of my story. That was part of who I was and what I was living for. The scary thing about pride, though, is you can't always identify it. It's like C.S. Lewis calls pride the chief sin. Just because, man, it has such a ripple effect into all these different areas of our life, our money, our relationships, and ultimately the relationship that we have with Jesus. And so those things were driving me. And I didn't really even know to what extent they were driving me. And that's the scary part. So, I see myself in a lot of young leaders, and as part of our work, we're committed to just helping young leaders deal with their pride. Because as you know, Mike, it can just be such a dangerous, and something I'll have to work on for the rest of my life. I mean, it's still in me. I am, man, so imperfect in so many ways, but by God's grace, He put things back together in that season of my life. So, grateful for that.
Yeah. What would you say to somebody? Because I just believe that there's, people that are going to listen to this episode and they find themselves smack dab right in the middle of a very painful season, a painful situation. And isn't it true that oftentimes it's on the backside of pain, whether that's failure or bad decisions or disappointment, where we experienced a certain level of shame, which causes us to then want to cover up or hide or suppress or hold back some of what we're experiencing. And I think one of the things that you teach so well, and I've watched you walk this out, is how to grow more and more in vulnerability. And so what would you say to somebody on how to be vulnerable with their pain?
Well, I don't know who said it, Mike, but I love this quote. I wish I could attribute it to the right person, but if you're going through something heavy and it feels dark, just remember you haven't been buried, you've been planted. And I really do believe that God does His best work in dark seasons, hard seasons, valley seasons, And that's, I think biblically that's true. Consider it pure joy when you go through trials of many kinds. For the testing of your faith produces perseverance and perspective and wisdom. And so I just, go to God's word. If you're struggling, you find yourself in a tough time, like there's some promises that you can cling to. And to that end, I'd also say this: when you're praying to the Lord, and don't just pray the problem, pray the promise. Get with God and claim those promises. Because His promises are true, and He has a great plan, and He uses people to remind us of those plans. I think about how many conversations, Mike, we had back in the day where you just spoke things over me, and this is what the Scripture says. Here's what the Lord's teaching me. Here's what I want you to hear. You were such a rock for me in those seasons. But, I also think sometimes you got to remove some things, sometimes God's best means you got to get rid of things that aren't meant for you. And sometimes He's got to do something in you before He can do something with you. And so maybe it feels to you like it's the wrong thing. But how many times, Mike, have you had something in your life that was taken away, and at the time it was really painful, and you're like, how could this be? This is wrong. But I'm just here to say, man, for the right things to come together, sometimes the wrong things have to be removed. And a lot of times when you remove the wrong thing, it doesn't feel like God's removing the wrong thing. It feels like you're suffering. It feels like, it might feel unfair. It might feel wrong. And I'm not even claiming to fully understand that. I don't, God works in mysterious ways, but I'm just saying that God might be doing a mighty work in your life and you don't even know it yet. And I can look back at my journey, 8, 9, 10 years ago, man, God was doing a mighty work in my life. And it sure didn't feel like it. It was the exact opposite feeling. But I can see it so clearly now, and your story's like that too. I know there's some things that you've gone through where it's like, man, it felt so painful. and it felt like the wrong thing, but it actually led you to some of the best things in your life.
Well, and I wanted to start here, and I'm so thankful for you sharing that hope with people that are walking through difficulty. And I really wanted to start at this place in your story because I really do believe that this has become, part of your foundation and what you're building upon. We fast forward to this particular season in your life, and like we shared, man, you're married, you're blessed with an amazing family. You run a company. I mean, you are impacting millions of people around the world. You're doing incredible work. You're influencing with some of the most world-class leaders, and you get to do some incredible things. But I think what stands out about who you are today and how you're leading today and the humility that comes through, I think is really, it points back to this particular season. And what I like to say oftentimes is don't allow your failure to be your undertaker, but let it be your teacher. And you did that. And I just want to speak that to somebody even right now. Like, you find yourself in a difficult season and it feels like a setback, but I just want to say this. I believe it can be a setup for a greater comeback. I've seen it in Jordan's life. I've seen it in a lot of people's lives. And so I want to kind of even just sort of transition the conversation now into just some of the work that you're doing. You're speaking on stages and you are coaching, world-class leaders, entrepreneurs, CEOs. You're coaching professional athletes. You get to work with some of the best and the brightest. And, I love developing leaders, speaking to leaders. I believe there's leaders that are going to be leaning into this particular podcast. And the beautiful thing is even if you're not leading an organization, but you're leading a family, you're leading. Like, you're leading somebody. And something that you teach and talk about a lot that I just want you to lean into for a second is how people's greatest need is to be seen and known. How can we get better? How can we do a better job of making people feel seen or known?
Well, it's a great question. It's a big question because I think at the end of the day, there's probably a lot of answers to that in terms of like practical application. But before we even get to the practical application, because there's somebody listening that's like, yeah, I kind of have that figured out. Or maybe that doesn't really feel like it's that important, like the art of encouragement or the art of elevating others. You're so gifted at that naturally, Mike. I shared this the other day on social media, but I'll share it here on the podcast. There was a article that came out, Harvard Business Review, and they interviewed a bunch of recent college graduates who quit their first job out of college within 12 months of taking it. So they interviewed all these recent college graduates. They all had one thing in common. They quit their job within 12 months of graduating. And they asked them, why did you quit? Was it lack of pay, lack of culture, lack of upward mobility, autonomy? Like, why did you walk away from your job? 79% had the same leading answer, and it was a lack of appreciation. Now, there's some people maybe listening to this who are Gen Xers, or maybe you're a baby boomer, or you're a millennial like us, and you're like, man, that generation's just gotten too soft. Listen, every generation is different, but it is what it is. If you're leading young people, if you're leading Gen Z or the younger half of millennials, this is a real thing. This generation grew up in an era with instant communication. They did receive a lot of praise. They probably talked to more people than you did. The information came quickly, and encouragement came quickly, and affirmation came quickly. And so the point is this: it is critically important that if we're leading, and again, I don't care if you're leading in the community, you're leading in business, or you're leading your family, like the art of encouragement and making people feel seen, valued, known, and heard is really important. And so a couple practical things that we teach on, Mike, and this stuff's so elementary, but like I think sometimes the simplest principles are the hardest to execute.
100%, man. 100%.
Common sense is not always common practice. And so I'm just going to talk about some things that are common sense and let it just be a reminder because it's not anything new. But the first would be the who over the do, the principle of praising somebody for who they are instead of for what they do. But we say it like this, man. If you praise somebody for what they do, they might remember it. If you praise them for who they are, they'll never forget it. So like, I could say to you, man, Mike, I just love that you're doing all this stuff, right? Like you're preaching on Sundays and you're putting together events and you got this podcast and you're coaching teams and like, how do you do it all? Like, I'm just so impressed with all that you do. And so that might feel good. Like, I hope it would feel good. but it wouldn't mean as much as if I said, hey, Mike, I think you're one of the most intuitive people that I've ever met. Like, man, your gift of reading the room and your awareness to what people need, how they're feeling, like, man, you just have this acute, unbelievable, innate ability to tap into the needs of people. And that's always been in you. Now you combine that with the gift of communication, somebody who's an incredible communicator. And I just think God set you up, Mike, with the gift of intuition and a gift of communication. And so, man, I just want to speak that over you. And it's who you are. It's those gifts inside of you that allow you to do what you do, the coaching, the teaching, the preaching. And so, man, I want to encourage you in that, not in the result or the echo of that gift. And so if you're a leader listening, and I hope that's just a reminder, because it's really easy to do, to pull somebody aside and praise the gift, instead of the result, or praise the who over the do. But I think sometimes we just miss it, And then the only other thing I'd say is I think a lot of times we just make assumptions that people know how we feel. And so, man, encourage people way more than you think you should, and then double it, like just go above and beyond, over communicate, like your people need it, and you don't know what people are walking through. So those would be just two really practical things on encouraging people and making people feel seen and heard.
Come on. I hope you have your notepad out right now, everybody that's listening. And I love what you said. It can be a simple principle, yet sometimes hard to execute. And I think it's oftentimes interesting how, as we continue to grow in our leadership, right, generations are changing. I love what you said. It's, as leaders, it's going to require a new level of intentionality and also a new level of frequency. Older generation, it could be your quarterly review, your annual review, and that was good enough. But to your point, Gen Z, man, the communication frequency has been pressed up a handful of notches. And so I love that you're bringing really practical ways that we can continue to grow to help people feel seen, known, and heard. And I think, that sort of segues into, I think one of your strongest abilities is to communicate. You just have an uncanny ability to come into a room. I say this, you're an atmosphere architect. You don't adapt to the temperature, you set it. Every room that you're in, man, there's an aura, a charisma, a care that even comes through in your communication. I think it's authentic, it's real, it's from the heart. You don't speak just to people's heads and hands, but you do speak to their hearts. I think it's just this beautiful, beautiful gift set that God has placed inside of you. And I say this, that the best leaders are the best communicators. Think about it. Think about breakdown in our families, or breakdown in on a team, breakdown in a company. Oftentimes we can point back to what? Communication. So being the world-class communicator that you are, I would love for you to just speak into the idea of communication. There's a story that you tell about a coach who wanted some feedback on communication from you. Can you kind of share that story and then just give our listeners some tips on how they can continue to elevate and grow in the craft of communication?
Well, yeah, I'll just set the story up by saying that I think most of us, myself included, we overestimate our ability to communicate. And part of that is we live with us all day, every day. And so we make a lot of assumptions, and we communicate with the world the way that we want to be communicated with. And so for that reason, I think many of us struggle and just in overestimating how clear we are, how connected we are to the people around us. Had a coach who for sure overestimated his abilities in communicating and reached out to us, wanted to hire us to work on his communication. So we have a coaching company, and a lot of our work is focused on connection and communication. And part of our work, we have people send us like a clip. So it'd be like a speaking clip, or in his case, it was a press conference. But I want to watch them, their body language. I mean, it needs to be video. We want to see them communicate. And so he sent us a 3.5-minute clip. It aired on national television. And I actually think he was pretty proud of it. So for our listeners to know, he sent this clip I think kind of wanting affirmation more than he wanted constructive feedback. Now, he's a coach, so he's a fiery guy, he's an energetic guy. He's communicated his whole life. And actually, I would tell you he's a pretty gifted communicator. I also want to point out, I don't have all the answers. we just have a team of people that helps with the analysis and the feedback, and then we give people a report on how they've communicated. So we're just crazy enough to scrub it 10 times and look for all the little things that other people might not be looking for. But then I have the privilege of sharing the feedback with people, you know? And so, man, I get on this call and we're doing the debrief. You know, hey, there's this 3.5-minute interview. We scrubbed it, looked at it. Let me give you the good stuff first. And then we're going to talk about some of the things that might be opportunities for you, some things that you could work on to improve your communication and connection. So I get past the good stuff. I say, Coach, let's talk about the constructive stuff. I said, do you know that you have a tick when you talk? And he's like, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, you have something that you do or say that gets in the way of your ability to be effective with people. We all have a tick. I have a tick too. And I'm not talking like a verbal tick or like a deficiency that way. I'm talking about there's a little thing that we do repeatedly that gets in the way. Mm-hmm. My thing, Mike, is I put my hand in my pocket. So if I watch myself speak, and I've seen it and I know about it and I teach this for a living and I still struggle with it. So I don't care how much you've communicated, how many stages you've stood on. Like, we all have things that repeatedly get in the way. And that's the point. We want to point those things out and help people with them. I said, Coach, do you know what your tick is? He's like, I haven't got a clue. I said, well, do you know, you use the phrase, you know, a lot. It's a filler statement. It's a connecting statement. So, man, you just, you know, you say this, you know, and then when you do that, you know, and then, you know, when you do that, you know. I said, so, you know, you say that, you know, quite a bit. He said, yeah, I guess I do say that. I said, well, I'm just curious, how many times do you think you said it in a 3.5-minute interview? He's like, man, I don't know. What I say it a dozen times? I said, well, we counted. And Coach, what if I told you said it 111 times in 3.5 minutes?
Oh my goodness.
And then he used some profanity that I'm not going to share on the podcast. But he basically, he called it out. He's like, there's no way, you know? And I'm like, bro, don't worry about it. There's only 3.5 million people that saw it. And by the way, it's in every interview, every time you open your mouth. So, but the point is this, man, like, here's the message for the audience. We all have something small like that we have to work on. Mm-hmm. And unless you're really getting feedback, you're never going to know that it exists.
That's so good, Jordan.
You know, like, feedback's the breakfast of champions, man. Like, we need to get more of it. I need to get more of it. We all do, because we overestimate how we communicate. And you live with you every day. And unless you're getting that intentional feedback, you just can't possibly see it. And so, man, I'm working on my hand and my pocket. And there's probably 5 other things that I do that I also need to work on. But the point is, get more feedback. If you communicate one-on-one, one-to-many, if you want to get better as a communicator, watch the game film. It's amazing what you'll pick up on. And then get with somebody who's willing to give you honest feedback, you know? Truth trumps flattery. Man, get somebody who's just willing to give you the truth.
It's so good, man. I want to ask you this. What do you think prohibits us from putting ourselves in positions to receive feedback? Is it our ego? Is it our insecurity? Is it just a muscle that we just haven't learned how to use? Like, why do we at times avoid putting ourselves in those vulnerable situations?
Well, I do think it's pride. I'll confess this to our audience. I don't love confessing this, but I'm going to confess it to our audience. Yesterday, Mike, I gave a talk to the Clear Creek Amana girls basketball team. So they play at state. Actually, they are playing right now as we speak. And so so the coach asked me to come in and speak. So I speak to the team, high school girls. And I had a mentor, a guy by the name of Dale Mulliken, who I think you know, Mike, who joined me. Truth teller, always sharing really honest feedback. And he just asked, he's like, hey, I just love to come watch you speak. I told him I was doing that. He's like, I'll just come give you feedback, whatever. And so, man, I walked in the room, Mike, and the Clear Creek girls team had invited the freshman boys to practice against them. They were going to scrimmage, as they prepare for their state tournament game. Well, the boys are sitting in the front row. And so naturally, I dap up all the boys, right? I go and I walk in, I'm giving them fist pounds before I talk. And I'm like, I don't know, it just felt like a natural thing. They were just sitting there. It wasn't that I was choosing the boys over the girls. They just happened to be in the front row. Yep. And so I grab a meal with Dale immediately after the talk. And man, Dale's a truth teller. And so he's like, all right, like I'm gonna give it to you. And I'm like, okay, I'm ready. He said, if I was one of those girls, man, you would have lost me in the first 10 seconds. And I'm like, what? Like, I thought it went pretty well. It's a high school girls basketball team.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, man, you just dapped up all the boys. Like, why didn't you dap up the girl? I was like, well, they were just sitting in front. I wasn't even thinking of it. Here's the point. This is the point. Dale had a perspective that I could not possibly have in that moment.
Wow.
I wasn't thinking about who I'm dapping up. I was thinking about what I was going to say. I was thinking about the girls. I was thinking about my message. I wasn't thinking about them. I was thinking about me. And where you sit determines what you see. You see something different than everybody else sees. Different is valuable. Dale had a different seat. He had a different perspective, and I needed to ask for his perspective. He saw something that I couldn't possibly see. And I wasn't thinking about them. I was thinking about me. My pride was getting in the way. By the way, it's a great Craig Groeschel quote. Where you sit determines what you see. You see something different. Different is valuable. So, man, get around somebody who has a different perspective. Like for you, Mike, like, it might be, and I know you're so intentional about this. It's like, I don't want feedback from other pastors. I want feedback from the person who's brand new to church.
Mm-hmm.
I want feedback from youth. I want feedback from the non-believer. Like I need feedback from all types of people that have different perspective. But I do think pride gets in the way. And then here's what Dale said to me yesterday. He said, hey, before you speak, man, go to the scriptures, Matthew 16. What does Jesus say to the disciples? If you're going to follow me, you got to first deny yourself.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And like, man, for me, Mike, before I open my mouth, I really just need to deny myself. We started the podcast, I'll give you credit, that way, like just denying ourselves. Like, Lord, let this be your conversation. Let this be your podcast. Like, let us communicate the things that you want us to communicate. It's not about us looking good or sounding good. This is about what you want to do through us. So that's a long answer to a really short question, but anything you want to add to that? I want to tap in because you deal with this too, Mike, where like I think pride can creep up and you're communicating just as much, if not more than I am in a public way.
Yeah. I mean, I think it can be ego. And then, like for me, it's just a matter of you have to be super intentional about how you pursue feedback. I always tell people this, that, I played college football at Iowa State. Every rep that I took at Iowa State, every single rep, every rep in practice was on tape. It was on film. It was reviewed, and then it was coached. And here's what I can tell you about the power of that is I look back on my athletic career in that 5-year period, and the growth and the acceleration of that growth, the pace at which I was growing, it increased, and I really feel like I was able to maximize my stewardship as a result of the constant coaching. So I think that's what, if you're a listener today, I think the reason why I wanted us to press into feedback and this idea of putting ourselves in a position to be coached is because it just allows us to move further, faster, right? Because we're actually getting a perspective that we don't have in and of ourselves. I mean, self-awareness is the first step to change. And sometimes the first step to self-awareness is actually letting somebody make you aware of something that you do or say or the way in which you lead. And so I think that's an incredible perspective. I kind of want to I could sit here and ask you a million questions, and I know that we don't have 5 hours together. We might have to bring you back for another show. But I do think that when we think about leadership, when we think about influencing, when we think about making a difference, one of the things that you say is you're most effective when you're most authentic. And, I think this is incredibly important for our listeners to understand. Can you just speak to that phrase and then maybe address why it is so difficult for us to walk in authenticity?
For me, I'll speak for myself. I think, anytime I'm struggling with authenticity, it usually stems from the fact that I've compared myself to somebody else or to something else. And so, my desire is not to be myself. My desire is to be like somebody else that God didn't create me to be. And the quickest way to kill something special is to compare it to something else. And so I think it starts with really being mindful of how often comparison is getting in the way, which again is a symptom of pride. We could probably spend an hour conversation. I know you just preached on pride recently, Mike, delivered a really powerful message about how pride gets in the way. But I really do believe, man, like when you're authentic, first off, I think people can tell when you're just being who you are, or when you're dressing it up a little bit, or you're trying to be a version of you that isn't authentic. Like, I think we got to give people more credit. They can, even somebody who doesn't know you, they can tell, like, this is really who this person is, or I sense that they're being a little bit fake. So that's one. And then, man, I've been thinking about this in the book of Matthew, man. I'm just reading Matthew 18, where the disciples are trying to figure out who's the greatest in heaven, right? And this passage, right? And so they ask Jesus, they say, okay, God, like, who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And Jesus responds, he grabs a child, and he says, unless you change and become like this child, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. And it's such an interesting passage in Scripture, because what God is saying is, like, unless you lay down your pride, unless you realize that without me, you really have no power or authority. Like, I think about Royce, or I think about, like, in our family, Mac, our little guy. Mac's 1.5. Royce has him by, I think, a couple years. But they don't have any real power or authority, Like apart from Jerica and Mike O'Connell, Royce is kind of probably kind of screwed. Like, he doesn't have a lot. He's probably going to struggle to survive, And same thing with little Mac. Like, Mac's 1.5 years old. Like, and so I've been thinking about just laying down my preference, tapping into the fact that, man, apart from God's power at work, and apart from my relationship with Jesus, like, he can't really bless anything that I'm if I'm trying to be somebody that I'm not. And so, yeah, man, and I'll leave the audience with this. I gave a talk, Madison, Wisconsin. I'll never forget it. I was on the other side of this painful thing that I had gone through, that we started this conversation with. But I never really talked about my story publicly. Never really shared it. And I just felt like one day God was telling me to share it. So I'm driving. Now, I'd not recommend anybody do this. So if you're a speaker, communicator, don't do this. God blessed it, but I wouldn't do it again. I was in Dubuque. I was going through Dubuque. I'm on 151. You know that road, Mike. So I'm like an hour and a half away from the event. Okay. And I felt like God was saying, hey, today I want you to be authentic. You're going to be real, and you're going to share a different message. And so I kind of fought God on that for a little bit. And I was like, okay, God, I'll roll with it. I'm just going to speak from my heart. I'll kind of ditch the presentation I was going to give, and I'm going to try to kind of wing it and give this other presentation that to me does feel more authentic. So, man, I just leaned right into it, Mike. I tell my story about getting fired and the decisions that I made and how awful it was. It was the single worst keynote presentation that I had ever given. I mean, it was brutal. Like, disconnected, far too emotional, probably meandering. Like, it just was not good. And I remember thinking, like, I got to get out of here, find the exit, because, like, I'll just give them their money back. Like, that just did not go well. And man, I learned a really important lesson on that day. Like, it's better to be impactful than impressive. Because while it was the least impressive speech that I had given, it might have also been the most impactful. And for the first time, I was really myself. I told the real facts. I shared the real story. There was real emotion. And I think people can be impressed with the things that we do well. I think people really connect with the things that we screw up, our weakness. And I just learned that, man. For the first time, there was just a long line of people that wanted to talk and they wanted to share. And, hey, I've been through some hard stuff too. And that message really touched me. But it was broken. It wasn't eloquent. It wasn't impressive. And isn't that how God works, man? Sometimes God just uses the least impressive, simple, broken things of this world to teach and equip. And so I don't know, man. Somebody out there that's trying to dress it up and really impress, man, lay it down. Be like the child. You don't have to have it figured out. Rely on the power of the Holy Spirit. Trust Jesus with who he made you to be, because he made you special, unique, different than anybody else on this planet. And you are you, and nobody is youer than you. So I hope that's encouraging to at least one person that's struggling with just being authentically who they are. Maybe you're struggling with comparison. God can't bless an inauthentic version of you. But when you decide to be who you were created to be, man, he can do amazing things. And so I've learned that. And unfortunately, it took me a lot longer than it probably should have, Mike. But man, today when I step on a stage, I'm trying to deny myself and just be impactful and realize that I was never impressive to start with, So that a couple thoughts, man, just on authenticity.
Yeah. Well, dude, it's so cool to see just where God has taken you as you've continued to lean into just being more and more who he's created you to be. I think that, I want to just sort of end this show by just saying and make this connection for our listeners. You've referenced your faith a ton in this show, and I know how meaningful it is to you. And I just think it's so beautiful because you're going into public companies and into, sports arenas and all these different spaces and places. And yet that is such a foundation for your life. I think, even for our listeners today, there's some people that maybe that's the thing that they've tried to hide or avoid. And I think it's so cool to watch you influencing at such a high level, yet regarding your faith so strongly. And I just want to commend you for that, man. I think when we think about this idea of building our backstage lives, I always say the secret place is the secret sauce. So I just say, hey, man, keep going, keep pressing in, keep being an example. We champion you. We're proud of you, man. I know that I've been personally impacted, and I know that our audience today was deeply impacted by the wisdom that you dropped. So thanks for being you. Thanks for being authentic. Hey, where can our listeners connect with you? Let's just say somebody's driving. They're like, I need to figure out how I can get in touch with Jordan and the company. Maybe they want to hire you to speak, or they're looking for a coach in this season of their life, or maybe they just want to be encouraged by your social media content. We're a couple of places that they can go check you out.
Well, I would just say the website, montgomerycompanies.com, or go check us out, Instagram, Facebook. We're fairly proactive in sharing content, Mike, like you are. Jordan M. Montgomery is the Instagram handle. So send me a DM. I'd love to connect, have a conversation if we can add value, be a blessing, a resource. I'm also going to give you a shout out, Mike, because you were on our speaking team, even though you were fully committed to Love Church. Once in a while, we could get you to come speak at a corporate event. I always love the way that you step into those settings. And I still believe this to be true because you are a pastor and your first priority is the church. I would say this to anybody on any call. That you are the best value speaker in America, because I think you could charge a lot in the corporate space given your giftedness and your skill set. But I love, man, how you steward opportunities, and it's not about the fee for you. It's about the impact. And so Mike is on our speaking team. So there you go. If you don't want me to speak, but you want Mike to speak, you can also get Mike through montgomerycompanies.com, or you can just reach out to Mike directly. That might be a more efficient way to do it. And then finally, I just want to say this, because there's at least one person listening to this episode and they're like, I'm not even sure about faith, and these guys are dropping scripture and talking about this Jesus that I feel like I don't really know. And you might not know Jesus, but he knows you. And I want somebody to hear that. He knows you. He loves you. He's known you your whole life, and he's inviting you into relationship with him. And it might be the reason you're listening to this podcast. So don't be impressed with us. Mike and Jordan are imperfect, very, very imperfect humans, imperfect leaders. But Jesus is perfect, and he knows you and wants to have a relationship with you. And so I wanted our audience to hear that. And really, Mike, there's nothing we're doing that is different than what we should be doing, right? We're just trying to walk in obedience to what God's called us to. So I want people to hear that too, that, to whom much has been given, much more is going to be asked. And I feel like he's given us a lot. We just want to steward the gifts well. So God bless you, bro. Thank you for having me. I'm just eternally grateful for your friendship, man, and the many ways that you've encouraged me, man. You're the best.
Yeah, you're such a blessing, bro. The scripture that comes to mind is Philippians 1:6. He who began a good work in you, Jordan, will be faithful to complete it. Keep going, my friend. Thanks for being on the show today. I know you bless many. God bless you, bro.
Love you, man.